Good morning, welcome. Please stand by as attendees are joining the webinar. I'm going to wait about 20 seconds for everyone to join before we get started. Welcome, everyone. So thank you for joining WISE and the Engineered Green Economics Advisory Committee at our third annual EGE Sustainability and the Next Generation Workforce Conference as a part of Circular City Week. I'm Christy Nguyen, Senior Director of Programs and Development. Before we proceed, I want to let you know that in the chat, you will find a link to the conference agenda and speakers' bios. There is also a Q&A feature, and we encourage you to ask our speakers and panelists questions. Let's talk about food. Food is about nourishment, community, and caring. It is also resource intensive, vital to the economy, and fragile. The bottom line, we can't live without it, yet we often take it for granted unless there's a crisis and it becomes the first thing we worry about. Today, we're diving into the topic with our speakers, to whom we are very grateful for taking the time to share their knowledge and perspective on all things food and sustainability. You will hear from Sam Pressman and Larissa of MicroFoodHubs and Homegrow. They will show you how art and design and technology can be a part of growing food in your classroom or your home. Phil Voss and Kyle Jeremiah of Energy Vision will speak to you about biofuel. What is it anyway? And how is this alternative fuel a piece of the solution for global warming? I will come back after them to speak to you about how EDGE can be in your school, as well as how companies and community organizations can support sustainability education. Last but not least, we will be joined by our incredible panel, moderated by Harun Asad, EDGE Advisory Committee Chair, joined by Lucia Aguilar of LSA Family Health Services, Jillian Hishaw of Family Agriculture Resource Management Services, or F.A.R.M.S, Ricky Silver of Daily Harvest, and Ynestrillas of the UN Sustainability Development Solutions Network. They will have a discussion about the challenges and innovations of food and sustainability. We also want to recognize our sponsors and partners: Con Edison, Wells Fargo, Deutsche Bank, BCG, Queensboro Toyota, the United Federation of Teachers, and of course, Circular City Week. Your support in advancing sustainability education is timely and more important than ever. Also, for our educators, if you'd like to receive the 2-hour CTLE credit letter, please download the CTLE survey that will be available in the chat starting at 1 p.m. Next, I would like to introduce Phyllis Pirillo, President and CEO of WISE.
is. Okay.
Okay, you're good to go. You can try your phone.
Good morning. It's so exciting that this is our third Wise Edge Conference. Thank you all for joining us, and special appreciation to our amazing slate of presenters. Christy Nguyen for organizing this conference, and to our WISE production team. Sustainability education is a multifaceted and complex area of study. So it is important that we gather today to learn from each other and to work together so that we improve the workplace, communities, and of course, the quality of life for our most precious asset, young people. WISE continues to expand our engineered green economics program because we strongly believe that sustainability education will help make the world stronger, more resilient, and bring about greater understanding of how to address the needs of our neighbors and our planet. I find it tough to believe that at this point in history, with the pandemic still in play, with so many wide-ranging social and environmental challenges, that sustainability is not an educational standard. The good news is that schools are beginning to incorporate sustainability in K through 12 classrooms. And WISE is proud to work alongside educators and with industry in support of sustainability education in schools. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Sonya Hu. Sonya Hu is partner at BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, which is one of the leaders in research and thinkers around the circular economy and sustainability. Sonya Hu advises leaders and organizations on topics including sustainable food and agricultural systems, international development with a focus on agricultural and smallholder farmers, total societal impact for consumer goods and food and beverage companies, and supply chain data and analytics for crisis preparedness and response. Without further ado, let's all welcome Sonya Hu.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you, Christy, for that wonderful introduction. So bear with me while I get my screen up here. Can folks see? Great. Let me just try to get it. All right. Great. So as Phyllis mentioned, I work in sustainable food systems quite a bit for both private sector, public sector, and social sector clients across the board. And then more recently have been doing a lot of supply chain resilience and response work as part of our COVID response. So let's get into it. I really wanted to take today to, as I was looking at the agenda, set up some of what is happening in the world around us related to food, and the impact that food has, as well as some of the solutions that we're working on. You know, a lot of this you all may already know, but hopefully you'll learn some new things as well today. So as many of you probably do know, food production and agriculture have a significant environmental impact. So food, it contributes to about 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, about 50% of land use, 70% of fresh water use, and 80% of water pollution. And livestock accounts for the nearly all of the biodiversity biomass that is in the world, which, you know, has implications for us as we think about not just our food systems, but other sectors as well. Now, to drill into that a little bit more, so you have the 25% on the left here, and on the right, you can see actually what are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from different parts of the food supply chain. So there is a good portion of it, about 1/4, that is coming from land use, includes cutting down forests to grow crops or to grow livestock. There's another 1/4 or so that is from actual, you know, what we think of as farming and crop production. 30% from livestock. That includes, you might hear a lot about, you know, cows farting and contributing methane to the atmosphere. Turns out it's actually burps more so than farts, but nonetheless. And then about 18% comes from what we think of as sort of the post-growing supply chain. So that includes food processing, transportation, packaging, and so on. And all of that is quite significant. When we look at some of the impacts, there's the impact on climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. There's also negative impacts from these activities that contribute to a decline in biodiversity. And that's really important both for the functioning of our food system, if you think of bees as pollinators and so on, as well as our healthcare system, if you think about the fact that, you know, 70% of our antibiotics and cancer drugs are actually inspired by things that are found in nature, and that inspiration is going away. And the worst part of that is the effects are being borne disproportionately around the world and in the US. In the US, we see that many of our most vulnerable populations will be negatively impacted by climate change and by the changes in the food system. And then globally, the same. So the chart on the left here, one of the things that it shows is the yield losses around the world. So you'll see that farming productivity, so the amount of food that you can grow per acre of land, is expected to decrease in large parts of the world, of the global south, particularly in Africa and Asia. You know, Russia might do okay here in Canada, but a large area is going to become very difficult to farm. And it's not just that yields are going down, it's that variability is going up as well, the same way we're getting more volatile weather. So events that may have occurred once in a century are now wiping out crops once a decade and sometimes even once every few years. And this has huge implications for the ability of smallholder farmers around the world to make their livelihoods, and it has implications for how we eat and get our food and the prices that we pay for food and the nutrition of our food as well. And at the same time, we are going to need to feed 10 billion people by 2050. That's up from about 7.5 billion today. And so that's not a great place to be. And then to pile on top of that, it's not always clear what we should be doing to make farming or make food production more sustainable. As one example, farming organically can have a lot of benefits for the environment and for the nutrition of the food that you're eating. But at the same time, if it's not as productive per acre, then you may actually need to use more land to grow the same amount of food, which can have negative impacts on the environment. So it's a really tough field, I think, to be working in, as I'm sure you'll hear from other panelists and presenters today. So now that I've made everybody not a little bit depressed on a Friday afternoon or Friday morning, I want to talk about some of the solutions and the opportunities that we see out there and that BCG does a lot of work in. So there's a huge problem, but there's also, we think, a huge and massive business opportunity for companies, for investors, for all sorts of actors out there to actually get ahead of the pressures that they are seeing from regulators and governments, from consumers, from their own employees, and from their own investors to be more sustainable. And so what we see is that companies are getting pressure from all fronts and more to do things and to make commitments and real actions that show their commitment to sustainability. And we think that there is significant economic opportunity, as I said, to take advantage of that. You know, I think the trend is slow, but customers are becoming more and more willing to pay for sustainability. They care more and more about the health and the environmental implications of what they're buying. You also need a sustainability strategy as a company to attract and retain the best talent that's out there. To be totally candid, you know, one of the reasons why BCG moved towards not just a net zero commitment, but actually a climate positive commitment where we've committed to take more carbon out of the atmosphere than we emit, is because of pressure, a lot of pressure from our own staff to make commitments that are ahead of our industry. And also investors are starting to care. I think not just investors pulling out of investing in, you know, coal and mining companies and so on, but actually we see more and more pension funds and banks and other large institutional investors actively investing in sustainability companies, some of whom may be represented in our presentation today. And just as one example, BCG has done some research around what we call total societal impact. And what we did is we looked at companies, in particular consumer packaged goods companies, so think like a General Mills, a Kellogg's, Pepsi, companies that have best-in-class metrics around societal impact. So that could be emissions, their impact on biodiversity, plastics and packaging, the water that they use. Those best-in-class companies actually have an 11% valuation premium in the marketplace. So the companies are worth more and they perform better. So with that, I want to talk about a few examples of where BCG and our team is tackling some of these different opportunity areas in the space. This is by no means exhaustive. There is just a tremendous amount of fantastic work going on out there at all levels, at the super local level, all the way out to the global level where the UN and the World Economic Forum and global players like that are making food systems one of their top priorities. The UN Food Summit is actually coming up, so that's very exciting, as some of you may know. But three areas I want to cover today. One is around regenerative agriculture. So how do we take agriculture from doing all of the negative things that I talked about earlier to something that is both less of an emitter of carbon, but also potentially even regenerating and contributing back to the land? The second is food loss and waste. Huge area of effort here. We'll talk more about that in a second. And then the third is around supply chain transparency, which is really important because in order for us to really make change, you really need to be able to know and track where your food came from and how it was grown and what its environmental and social impacts were. And without that transparency and traceability, it becomes really hard to measure. It becomes really hard to attribute and figure out who's doing good and who's not. And so that's really critical as well. So tackling regenerative agriculture first. So as I mentioned, regenerative agriculture it's a very broad term. So there's a lot of practices that fall under it. And there's also a lot of science that's still left to be done around what it really means and where does it work. But at its core, it's about practicing farming in ways and adopting practices that will regenerate and benefit the environment rather than take away from it. And the basic idea there is that you want to improve the quality of the soil, not dirt. Never tell a farmer that they have dirt, but improve the quality of the soil so that it can actually hold more carbon in it, so that it can hold water better and be more nutritious to grow plants and food that are more nutritious. There's a few different principles around regenerative farming. There is, not tilling or not plowing the land. There is keeping the soil covered. So when you pull up your crops, instead of just leaving the soil exposed, you actually plant other crops in between your sort of cash crops. And a few other practices that are laid out here as well, including integrating livestock and so on. And basically what these practices do together is that they help to, again, improve the quality and the health of your soil, as well as improve the amount of carbon that is captured in the soil. And so not only are you reducing the emissions from farming through things like being better about how much fertilizer you use and and on-farm equipment emissions, but you are also able to potentially actually what we call sequester carbon or remove carbon from the atmosphere. We've done work for a couple of companies that work in this area. So one is a startup that actually pays farmers to adopt these practices that we've laid out here. And they do that by matching those farmers to companies that actually want to buy more sustainably grown grains. So if I am a food company that wants to be able to say that the corn or the wheat or the rice that I purchased was grown in a more sustainable way, there are companies out there that can match you and sort of create that funding stream to farmers who are willing to make the change and adopt these practices. Another effort that we've supported on is using things like satellite imagery, so advanced digital technology, machine learning, and algorithms to give farmers tailored recommendations on how they can farm, how much fertilizer to use, and basically what practices will help them achieve the outcomes, these more sustainable outcomes that they're looking for. So lots of potential in this space around regenerative agriculture. So the second area that I want to talk about is food loss and waste. So as some of you may know, about a third of our food is lost or wasted, which amounts to about 1.6 billion tons a year, worth about 1.2 trillion a year. And that food is not always wasted in the same place around the world. So here in the US and other developed countries, it's often wasted or lost at the point of retail. So at the grocery store, or when we all take it home, if you think about how much food you've potentially thrown away. But in developing countries, that food is actually often lost on the farm, or it's lost in the transportation or storage chain somewhere because there aren't refrigerated trucks. There aren't enough people, the infrastructure isn't good enough for a farmer to sell what they produce. So very different solutions in different places to tackle this. And so one of the things that BCG has done is teamed with several organizations to write a report on what are the initiatives that you can put in place to tackle the food loss and waste problem. And we've also worked with, for example, one retailer, sort of a grocery store, to take their produce and their food that is close to expiry in the store, and then within the store actually translate that food into products like soups and juices that they can then sell in the store, to try and create some circularity within the store so that that food isn't just being thrown out. And then the last solution I want to talk about is actually a venture that BCG, along with the World Wildlife Foundation, co-created essentially. So this started as kind of a startup idea, and then we actually spun it out into its own business. It's called OpenSC for supply chain. They started out as a blockchain-based platform, but have moved into being a platform or technology agnostic platform. And basically they're using a combination of a whole bunch of different technologies, from sensors to algorithms and machine learning and so on, to create that traceability that I talked about in the food system, so that you actually get, you actually are able to say, okay, this fish came from this area of the world off of this boat, and this is how it traveled through the supply chain to the store, to the plate, to the store and to your plate. And again, I think that's just one of those really critical enablers, because what it allows you to do is actually give credit to, whether it's the fisher or the farmer who's doing something good that you're willing to pay for. So let me stop there. I know we're, I think, right at about time, so we may not have time for a lot of Q&A if there is any. I'll share some pictures from a field research trip that I took to interview livestock farmers in Tanzania and India. Got to spend some time with a lot of farmers and a lot of animals. But I'll maybe stop there and see if there's any questions. So I do see one question around financial services companies, around and reports that banks are continuing to increase lending to the fossil fuel industry. I think that I think that's going to continue to happen so long as the economic incentives are there. So, companies will continue to look to make money. And I think you have some of the levers that I talked about earlier. I think there's regulation, not necessarily to stop banks from lending, but regulations around what fossil fuel companies, oil and gas companies are able to do. And then I think there's also, when you look at fossil fuel companies, a lot of them are actually making, not all of them, but a lot of them are actually making quite significant commitments to change their portfolios and to invest actually their own dollars into more renewable, sustainable energy sources, or in natural-based solutions, in part because they're trying to get ahead of that. So I think for me, it's about making the more sustainable options more economically viable. So sometimes it's about investing in early innovation and R&D in order to help those technologies leapfrog. It can also be about, us as consumers, but also creating the right sort of incentives in place to help the revenue streams and the market shares of the companies that are actually doing more sustainable activities. But at the end of the day, I think you have to make it worth their while to invest in other companies, and also worth their while to not lend to fossil fuel companies. But it's hard. And Christy, maybe I'll just, or I'll let you either tell me I've gone over time, or I can keep moving down this list, or I'm happy to address some of these offline after as well.
If you could answer one more question, that would be great. You can choose.
All right.
And then we can answer the other one offline.
Sounds good. Yeah, so maybe I'll tackle the last question on whether individual actors and companies buy into sustainability or local governments. And it also goes back to what the best solution is. And I think the short answer is we need everything. I think when you look at any scenario for climate change and any scenario for what that's going to do to our food systems, we need to pull every single lever that we have. So I think it's everything from the decisions we make as individual consumers around what we purchase and what we choose, all the way to acting and having our governments and elected officials put in place policies and regulations and incentives that support sustainability. And I think if we don't have all of that working in the right direction, it's going to be a very tough path to tread.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. What you all are doing here is extremely important, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I suppose that is the cue to start. Morning, everyone. I'm Larissa, and with me is Sam Pressman. And today we're here to introduce a little about our work with MicroFoodHubs and our little group Homegrow, and how we've been working with educational organizations around the world into delivering sustainability and food growing education to classrooms. So thank you, Y, so much for inviting us today. Next slide. Yeah, so I'm Larissa. My background is in research. I'm also an urban planner and social worker. I'm currently a PhD student doing research located in Iceland and also in New York simultaneously. And Sam Pressman here, he's an ecological systems designer. He's won several awards from the New York State and Brooklyn Borough for designing community gardens that serve the community. He's also a master food grower, as we will see further in the slides. So together we founded Homegrow, which is a not-for-profit entity that serves community organizations to build food growing systems, and also in schools and other kinds of institutions. So back to how we really started Homegrow as a project. We did a lot of research as master's students when we were at Pratt Institute. So we basically come from different disciplines. For myself, more in the social sciences, urban planning, community development aspect, thinking about how we can deliver economic development solutions to underserved communities, especially within New York City. And for Sam, he comes from more of the systems design, green infrastructure background, and thinking about the technical aspects of these systems. And together, we did a lot of research with community gardens around New York City, where basically a lot of immigrants, Black, Brown community leaders have used these spaces to cultivate food, to activism that supports underserved communities. And of course, it's to also grow food and feed people who really needed it around the community. So I'm going to pass it to Sam Pressman to talk more about how this research ended up.
Yes, so thank you. We've partnered with organizations like New York City Community Garden Coalition and Earth Justice environmental law firm. And together we've been able to create a legal petition project called From the Ground Up. And this is on a mission to designate community gardens in New York City, city-owned in particular for this this petition, to be deemed the designation of critical environmental area, which is a land license given by New York State to any piece of land to make that land be permanently protected from real estate development, which is the #1 encroaching problem on the last remaining pieces of nature in our city. So what we've done is we've gone out there, we've interviewed dozens of gardens and gardeners and community activists, and together compiled a database of information and history of why there's a need to protect gardens and why those gardens impact people in such a positive way. And so this has all kind of been influenced from the issues that are going on in today in the world. You know, as we've seen that we are doing more damage to the environment than ever before. We are not feeding, we're feeding fewer people than ever before, and we are not meeting the needs that not only our planet, but our future generations rely on us to act on now. And so this push from young people, you know, leaders like Greta, and as well as older people who have joined them, like Ron Finley and Karen Washington, amongst so many others who are fighting for systems change. And this is the world that we're living in now, is that we realize the old systems are not working well and they're unsustainable, and we need to make a major change from the bottom up. And so just to give you an idea of some of the other work that we've done, you know, in waste management, for example, and education, how we were able to, I worked with a group at Pratt Institute to create a project called the Blue Wave. And this is a mobile traveling sculpture that has gone to over 7 schools now in New York City. And what it does is to create impact. It brings awareness. It allows students to engage with the sculpture and kind of get firsthand sight of what it would be like to have plastic waves and instead of real waves. And so the project has gone on, traveled around, and it was honored by the UN as to place an image of it on their website. And so that's what this culminated into. But it really began with the idea of, okay, how do we actually help young people realize that our culture of this single use, this monoculture type of wasteful culture, that is, what is the repercussion of that on a daily basis? Well, the result is this wave was made from plastics waste harvested from just 24 hours at one college campus, and that this could be replicated every day in many places. And lastly, our work with gardens has led us to kind of bridge the whole scientific aspects and the needs to create a healthier environment in urban spaces. And so what I worked on for my thesis was to create a user-friendly quantification tool that allows students and researchers to be able to measure certain services, natural services that are actually are under the radar, being overlooked by the city, in terms of the fact that nature helps provide services to us that built systems in the city are trying to do, but that by scaling ecosystem services and scaling more vegetation in the city, that we can increase those natural services and therefore reduce the cost of the city having to try and do those same services. And so this kind of goes into the whole realm of, okay, how can we scale this in a more innovative way? And so when we look at how we can create intensive food growing hubs or gardens, both in home spaces and in very underused, you know, paved spaces of sorts throughout the city, that we can create a micro food forest, so to speak, where people can grow more food than they are actually that they think they can, through vertical systems, through a more intensive and diverse planting. And this is, I think Larissa is going to talk to you a little bit more about how we can start to bridge the technological aspect into food growing today.
Right, thanks, Sam. So I think years ago, before these sort of smart indoor school gardens started popping up around the city in New York, I think mostly it would be the school gardens program from Green Thumb, which is city run, that, there will be some gardens right outside or in the backyards of schools that would be part of some sort of extracurricular or within curriculum activities for students. But nowadays we're seeing more and more organizations such as Teens for Food Justice shown here, setting up some of these smart indoor farms for schools. And so for Teens for Food Justice, they mostly work in Brownsville, a very underserved community. And so the availability of these gardens and having students being involved in running them actually is a great educational experience, but they're also able to serve their peers during lunchtime extremely fresh, healthy foods. So it's a win-win definitely all around, and we're hoping to see more of this come around. And so that directly links to our work that we're doing. So we've collaborated with our partner F.A.R.M.S in Iceland, and we're basically, piling up our experiences from different spaces to see how we could develop a very integrated curriculum into kindergarten to year 12 studies, looking at different aspects of food growing and sustainability, how that could insert seamlessly into different disciplines. And so here are some of the learning and impact goals that we've looked at. So how to grow food with DIY-based strategies, as Sam showed with how he was able to demonstrate in his garden. How to engage students to design and build with nature, and that fits in with sustainability and technology simultaneously. How food also leads to healthier diets, how it being freshly grown itself is so important to serve the healthier lifestyle, and how this influences to create a better health environment for students and their families alike. And how to finally innovate with food growing systems. This is something that's not normally integrated in any sort of school curriculum these days. So we're trying to actually bring this knowledge of food growing and related systems back, and how this would fit into our modern era ag tech industries and bio innovation. And of course, there's also an intention to serve fresh food to students. And so this is more of an overview of how the curriculum will look like not more like week to week, having different check-ins, how we as an organization would come in and help schools manage their farms as well. And it's also looking at how we could reuse different materials, as Sam will talk more about later, to build these systems cost effectively, because that's always something that's an issue into really establishing and managing these farms on rooftops and within indoors of schools. So Sam, we can fast forward. Yes, so this is just more of the curriculum that we are happy to share further.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. Right, so the idea is how can we begin to transform highly unused materials, right? In this case, trash, right? So today, most of our trash is actually not supposed to expire for much longer than what we have been trained to think that it's expiring at. And so the materials that we're packaging things in, the composition of those materials often are going to be around for a long time. And so not just plastics, but many other materials. And so when we start to think about them as vessels that can hold soil and which is just all that a plant needs, then youth is specifically can get into this realm of thinking of this a circular mindset that that everything, that if it's durable enough that it can go on to have a new life. And we want to bridge this into the whole realm of growing food and creating art with it, right? And so it can go from very basic things like this to how to actually begin to help students and young people and just people in general understand that they can extract a lot of value from not just food that they grow, but food that they buy at the store, for example. And so what we're trying to do with our curriculum is show the full cycle of what at each stage of the process, how a student could take advantage of thinking about planning to start their food garden or their food system. And so we always stress that food is never trash, and that that the way to go is to actually try and utilize some of the things around us. So the process is very basic. You know, we start with conducting waste audits, just as I did with the Blue Wave. This could be done on a even much smaller scale. So a student, for example, or a classroom could decide to collect trash for just one week or even a couple days and make projects out of that. And so this obviously leads to a reduction in waste in general, and it helps young people really understand and want to actually strive to collect more of these. You know, they get into this routine and they start having fun with it. And ultimately that we can try and train young people to think about how to actually work with food in the kitchen, and then as a result create products that they can share and or exchange, sell eventually. And I'll pass it on to Larissa again, but the goal, one of our big goals is of course to begin to integrate sensor technology. As we know that many parts of the world and environments make it difficult to grow food and make it so that with automated systems, they would be able to better serve the needs of for their people in their area.
Right, so here are some images from Iceland, actually. So on the left, you could see it's our partner Fry. They're working with some younger students at about age 8. And what you see here is a tower at the back, a hydroponic tower. So basically the difference with that is that it uses water only to grow the plants with an addition of nutrition liquids that you would put into the system, and electric pump pumps water through it nonstop. So this is kind of one of the newer sorts of systems that you might find in other smart indoor farms. And it's kind of trying to teach about and learn about different food growing technologies that we can incorporate for different benefits, of course. So on the right here is more of a DIY sensor setting built with Arduino kits that the Fab Labs, along with Fry, they have been developing in Iceland. But this is something that's fairly easy to do if you have experience fabricating some of these things. And Fab Labs, for those who aren't familiar, are basically some co-working spaces, but are kind of intended for people to prototype products. So there's often 3D printers to other electrical devices, and there's usually some staff members to support you to do these kind of things. And there's several in New York City as well. It's a growing movement all around the world, and it really fits into the idea of how do you create things sustainably. It's the idea of like you transfer blueprints globally while you create with materials that you could locally source. So thinking about how this new process of making, prototyping, and creating manufacturing could fit into the educational curriculum itself. This is one of our intentions and goals. And here, what you see here is something that Mattis in Iceland has been doing. Mattis is kind of the governmental food research agency, and they've commissioned a set of open source videos, which basically everyone can access on YouTube right now. And they're intended for virtual reality. So you could wear this headset and you could feel like you're visiting some of these future kitchens or like indoor farms, biotech spaces. So it's a very immersive experience for someone that maybe you don't have a few hours to drive to the countryside to experience high tech or, you know, just conventional farms, but how can you really more tangibly, virtually experience these spaces and want to be part of it. So this really fits into this sort of sustainability and agriculture technology learning curriculum. Yeah, so Sam can talk a bit more about this.
Right. So we're then looking at bridging science projects and research, even on a micro scale, even coming from the classroom on from youth groups, all the way up to more experienced groups, that we can begin to actually replace a lot of these materials and components that we're using when we grow food with much more sustainable, much more user-friendly, I guess, recipes, right? And so this is some of the results that could lead to, is you have a variety of materials that are not going to be around for hundreds and hundreds of years, but instead will be able to biodegrade in a much more timely manner, and that also will be able to not off-gas or off-leach any pollutants as a result in the end. And so this is kind of the next step for what we want to include in our curriculum as well.
Yeah, so a bit more of an introduction to what we're doing as Homegrow, the organization. So we've teamed up with a few software developers, designers to create this platform, the Homegrow digital platform, where basically it's a way for students and other people to manage food growing collaboratively. So you would think a lot of these technical systems with food growing would do with, farm management in the back end. But however, we're trying to make this into a friendly interface that people could really work with each other to manage their farming spaces, community garden spaces, also with these low-cost sensor technologies that we're trying to encourage people to build themselves, and how this could all connect to the platform. So the next slide, yes. So more of the platform is how we could actually connect people hyper-locally to share designs, tips, and food growing together to build out this network, this community of food growing within urban areas. And yes, so so that's a very quick overview of what we're doing, and we very much welcome and encourage you to explore more on our social media and our websites. And we are about to launch our platform with some pilot schools and other organizations that are interested to manage their farms in an interactive way. So please do feel free to contact us and be in touch to pilot our platform as well. And we're very looking forward to really ignite this movement of food growing and citizen managed food supply chains within cities. So thank you very much. Please do feel free to ask us any questions here. I think we have a few minutes.
Yes, if you could track the questions. I'm just leaving this up for a few seconds for anyone who might want to take this information. So we have one question. Do you see that? So the question is, what are the first steps in experience, but supportive? I'm sorry, the question was a little oddly phrased. So how to help students and schools become more sustainable? What are the first steps to that? Right, so I think in our topic, the realm of conducting waste audits is a good first step in terms of trying to, because a lot of schools don't have too many funds to be able to put out to just have whole new systems built or a whole garden put in. And so if there's a strategy to be able to harness and collect some of these other alternative materials, then they would maybe be able to start much more affordably, and maybe they mix and match with some purchased materials and some that they are able to harvest through the audit. Otherwise, making partnerships with local gardens local community stakeholders that may play a role with their education and their outreach to the community. I think those might be some couple points. And then the next question is the baseline ecosystem services tool still live? Is it applicable outside of New York City schools? So the tool was created to be a baseline metrics tool for the measuring of vegetation almost anywhere. And so the fact that the vegetation that we measured is in New York City is just coincidence. It can really, I could have applied that in any piece of vegetation or any tree for that matter. And it's not a live platform per se. It is a that what you saw, that file is what we have so far, and you are able to download it, and I would be happy to share a link. So thank you for that.
I think we also saw this question briefly pop up, if there's anything for adults too to incorporate. So Sam has been leading on some on the ground design build work in New York too. So we've been working with some health and social services organizations to also similarly set up these sort of food growing hubs that would support its residents and also the overall environment. So any backyard that's just covered, overgrown with weeds could be turned into a very productive and beautiful food growing hub.
Yes, and that's what we want to do. So thank you so much for, oh, it looks like one more. What kind of fertilizer do you all use? Do you use compost or liquid? Yeah, so I always stay away from, I try to stay away from very potent products, but you know, composting is a great thing. I do it at home. Otherwise, I don't think it's, I don't see a problem with using fertilizers if you need to. Like I said, I don't, sometimes I'll use F.A.R.M.S. That's a company I advocate about, but otherwise, yeah, just no Miracle-Gro. Thank you. So I don't know if we have much more time. I know we're a little behind, but we have one more question. Where's the soil from? So I am partnered with, I work with community gardens, and I have the ability to acquire soil and compost from various gardens. I try to tell people about this resource and that it's much cheaper than going to the store. It's much better. And so, yeah, it's taken time. It's a lot of trips to get it up to the rooftop garden, but in general, there are avenues to acquire soil almost for free or very cheaply through gardens or the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Phil Voss, and my colleague Kyle Jeremiah and I are here from Energy Vision to talk about two relatively little known forms of renewable energy, biogas and biomethane. We're going to place them in the context of food waste, and sustainability. The image on the right will make a bit more sense in about 5 slides. Biogas and biomethane are both part of the broader category of biofuels, which are produced directly or indirectly from organic material or biomass. This category also includes fuels like biodiesel, renewable diesel, and ethanol. Biogas and biomethane can both be made from food waste. Biomethane is also called renewable natural gas, at least in the United States, and we will be using the terms more or less interchangeably. This is going to cover a lot of ground. We have got a lot of slides, so do please read along. This is a little bit about information about Energy Vision. We are a nonprofit environmental research organization focused on clean, renewable energy and transportation fuels. These are some examples of our research, including a general introduction to renewable natural gas, a look at the potential role of renewable natural gas in decarbonizing New York City municipal fleets, and an assessment of the potential biomethane supply for transportation in Colorado. Most importantly for today, Food Waste Erased is a 2017 report we did looking at food waste and its prevention. This report looks at using food waste to produce biogas, but only as a final option for inedible food. If we're going to be talking about sustainability, we best define it. We have got two definitions here, one from the US EPA and one from the United Nations. Ultimately, both are about the duty of each generation to remember the needs of the generations that will come after. And these are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 interlinked goals representing a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Part of that logo may look familiar from the first slide. Each of these goals has got specific targets with achievement dates between 2020 and 2030. Biogas and biomethane support several of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you're going to see these symbols a few times as we go forward. When we use these symbols, we're not saying we've captured all the relevant SDGs in every case, but we are providing some examples. At the moment, the biggest sustainability challenge that we face is climate change, which occurs when the greenhouse gas emissions created by human activity trap heat in the atmosphere, with a range of negative impacts on climate and weather. By some accounts, we have got a decade to prevent the worst outcomes of climate change. So, what is the relationship between food and sustainability and climate change? At the simplest level, it looks sort of like this. If we damage our environment, we damage our food supply. This presentation will look a lot at the idea of properly managing our food supply to protect the environment. And in thinking about our food supply, something that came up during Sonya's presentation, we need to be thinking in terms of all food produced, including the three categories that you see here. Now, why is that? Because food loss and waste are global issues. The UN estimates that about 1/3 of all food produced is never consumed. The 1.3 billion tons shown here is a little lower than Sonya's number. We've translated that tonnage into pounds just because it is an illustratively incomprehensible number. The food waste numbers for the United States are considerably smaller, but they're still not great. We're talking about 126 billion pounds of food waste annually. And to put that in perspective, the Great Wall of China, which is 13,000 miles long, is estimated to weigh 10 billion pounds less than America's annual food waste. Or if we want to keep that a bit more local, we can denominate food waste in terms of the weight of the Empire State Building. Now, this slide shows that New York City is generating about 1.2 million tons of food waste, that's commercial and residential, every year. What does that look like? This is taken from a 2017 report by the Natural Resources Defense Council. Please bear in mind that this report was based on a normal pandemic-free year. There are 11 sectors on this chart, everything from households to hotels to prisons. 5 of them account for 90% of food waste coming out of New York City. Now, an earlier slide mentioned wasted food. According to that NRDC study, over 50% of food discarded was typically edible. Bear in mind that a lot of it will still have been in its packaging. While so much edible food is being discarded, there are people in the US who don't know where the next meal is coming from. The 36 million people referenced on this slide That's a little bit more than the combined populations of New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. And food insecurity is why we're starting to see legislation like this, which says the commercial establishments in New York State must divert edible food to people, and any actual waste must be kept out of landfills for environmental reasons we'll get to shortly. That New York State law is in keeping with the EPA food recovery hierarchy shown here, which emphasizes reducing food waste at source, diverting edible food to hungry people, and then diverting food scraps to animals. And that helps support 2 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. If we return to this graphic, there is another factor that we have to consider. Climate change is rightly linked to the burning of fossil fuels on which our economies have relied for centuries, but another contributor is food waste. So now some core definitions that will be important for the rest of the presentation. Decomposing organic waste to release biogas, which contains methane. Biomethane, or renewable natural gas, is biogas that has been refined. And please remember those life cycle emissions. They will be important later. If you are only looking at the emissions when the fuel is used, you're only getting part of the story. To keep it brief, food waste that is not properly managed is putting methane into the atmosphere and worsening climate change. As a greenhouse gas, methane is 86 times more potent than CO2. That number comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The United States EPA has not yet adopted it, but the state of New York has. It is the combination of food being wasted when people are hungry and greenhouse gas emissions, which have led to high profile and international efforts to cut food waste. Methane is a common factor with all the organic wastes that we produce. Food waste, waste from the animals that we use for food, and the wastes that we ourselves produce. It's even produced by yard and park waste like grass clippings and leaves. Which brings us back to the EPA food recovery hierarchy, which says that after food has been diverted to people and then to animals, it should be used to produce energy. Diverting for just a moment, the next option on the food recovery hierarchy is compost, a low-tech way of converting organic waste like food scraps into nutrient-rich material that can be used to nourish plants and soils. There are numerous composting projects here in New York City which help communities recycle their waste. These projects are a very important way of dealing with food waste, but they represent just a fraction of the processing capacity we need to deal with all of our food waste. But composting is important, and if you have the opportunity to, please do it. Getting back to biogas, this is the untreated gas that is released by organics decomposing in an oxygen-free environment. That is a process called anaerobic digestion. And by organic waste, we mean, as noted, food waste, animal manures, sewage. Biogas is why at landfills like this one, you see flares like this one being closed, oxygen-free environments. Landfills are giant anaerobic digesters. Organic materials decompose and release biogas, and gas collection systems bring the biogas to the surface for a controlled burn via flare, which eliminates the majority of the methane, but puts a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere for no apparent benefit. This is a combined heat and power, or CHP, system at a landfill in Quebec. It uses the methane in biogas to produce electricity and also captures the heat from that process. Landfills are not the only things that produce biogas. They do produce an awful lot of it, and far too much of it is not recovered. But the process can be replicated elsewhere. This is a basic diagram of one type of purpose-built anaerobic digester, just to give you an idea of how it works. Feedstocks, so food waste, animal manure, wastewater, flow in, they get mixed up with microbes that are resident in the digester, and they break down over time. Things settle into layers by weight, and biogas collects at the top and then is pulled out for use as energy. Gradually, the liquid produced by the decomposition process, which is called digestate, is also pushed out of the system, and more about that later. This process might be mesophilic, which is to say cold. It might be thermophilic or warm. It could be single stage or multi-stage. Either way, it is taking place over the course of weeks, and material is continuously added to keep the process going. So where do digesters get used? Many water resource recovery facilities have got anaerobic digesters. On the top left are the 140-foot tall digester eggs at the Newtown Creek wastewater facility in Brooklyn. The biogas they produce is used on site to provide electricity and heat to run the plant. And on the top right is a somewhat smaller facility in Westchester County. Lower left, at this dairy farm in Florida, digesters will process manure from nearly 10,000 cows. And on the right, the digester in upstate New York on a dairy farm uses a different technology than in the diagram. It's basically just a covered trench in the ground, but it accomplishes much the same thing. And of course, they can be used for processing food waste. On the left is one of two anaerobic digester facilities to which Toronto is diverting all its residential food waste. And on the right is a somewhat smaller facility that processes pre-consumer food waste in Connecticut. Now, this is not just a high-tech solution for rich countries. India is short on wastewater infrastructure, and it's got a huge sanitation problem. At top left, you have a picture of a small digester that is connected to a public toilet block in the background, so it's using human waste to produce biogas. That sort of system also produces biogas for cooking to the communal kitchen in Tiruchirappalli in southern India, pictured at the bottom. And this is an example of biogas meeting 2 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Indian example demonstrates that digesters can be pretty small. One might look like this one on a farm in France. It might look like this one made from an old bulk shipping container by students at the University of South Florida. It might look like this small one behind a bodega in Mexico, which uses the food waste from the shop to produce biogas for cooking hot food. Or it might look like this modular version behind a brewery in Seattle. Alternatively, it might look like this one, made from a plastic barrel in a classroom in the Bronx with the help of nonprofit Solar Cities and of Energy Vision. Now, you may remember that I mentioned digestate when we first saw this diagram. That stuff is quite interesting as well. Digestate is the organic material that's left over from the digestion process, and it can be used as a high nutrient liquid fertilizer shown on the left. You can also strain out the remaining solids and get both fertilizer and a rich compost. Both these products can help reduce the use of chemical fertilizers, which can damage soil health in the long term. Many farmers use straight livestock manure for fertilizer, but it doesn't always absorb completely into the soil, and farmers often top up with chemical fertilizers. Because the manure doesn't absorb completely, it can also run off when it rains and end up in local water sources. It also just doesn't smell great. But if you use digestate made from manure instead, it absorbs into the soil more readily and does its nutritional job better, reducing the use of chemicals. More ready absorption also means it doesn't wash into nearby water bodies, and digestate is almost odorless. Digestate fertilizer helps promote SDG 2 in the form of growing more food, SDG 6 by protecting water systems, and SDG 15 by promoting sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. Now, the Indian project shows what a small community scale project can look like, but what might such a project look like in, say, New York City? There's a type of project Energy Vision would like to do, but we haven't identified a site yet. Suppose that a New York City housing project collected food waste from its residents and put them into a microscale anaerobic digester. You could use the energy from the digester to heat and light a greenhouse, and then use the compost to grow vegetables and make those available for the tenants. Just a thought. Anaerobic digestion of food waste produces energy and valuable agricultural inputs that can be used to grow more food, allowing us to close the loop on food waste. However, the thing is that biogas is actually limited in its uses. It contains impurities and has a relatively low methane content. So you're sort of limited to electricity and or heat, most likely at the site where the biogas is being produced, which is why sites that can't use it all end up flaring a lot of it, like at this water resource recovery facility. Upgrading biogas opens up a range of possibilities and also means that you aren't flaring what you can't use. You get from biogas to biomethane, you want to filter out most of that CO2 and the other impurities. And if anybody wants to talk about how you do that, we can do that in the Q&A. Now, remember, the life cycle emissions means all the emissions, greenhouse gas emissions associated with its fuel from its production to its use. Here, carbon neutral means that if you look at the emissions prevented by a fuel, for instance, because you made it by capturing methane, and compare that to the emissions that come from using it, on balance, there are no new emissions. Carbon negative means that making the fuel actually prevents more emissions than come from using it. And that biomethane, or renewable natural gas, is interchangeable with fossil natural gas means it's flexible. You can use it to heat buildings, to generate electricity, or to fuel vehicles. So back at Newtown Creek, they're doing a couple of interesting things. First, they are adding food waste to the sewage, which is called co-digestion, and increases the biogas output. They're also installing equipment to turn the biogas into biomethane, which means it can be used off-site to heat homes, generate electricity, or fuel vehicles. Now, think about this for a moment. New York City has actually got 14 wastewater treatment plants with anaerobic digesters. A lot of those digesters need to be renovated, but imagine for the moment that they're all in good repair. If all of them could accept some of the city's food waste, and if all of them had equipment to upgrade the biogas, we could process a lot of our food waste within the 5 boroughs and produce energy. And that would mean sending a lot fewer trucks like these all over New York State and the East Coast to dispose of our waste. Back in Toronto, the city intends to use biomethane produced at its 2 anaerobic digesters to fuel its garbage trucks. The trucks will pick up the food waste, which in turn will be converted into fuel for the trucks. All that landfills and all that methane stays out of the atmosphere. A biomethane project with a bit more of a community flavor is this site on Chicago's South Side, where a community organization called Green Era plans to build this facility, which will process 85,000 tons per year of food waste, producing renewable natural gas, which an area utility will buy, and they will use the digestate to grow fresh food in a part of Chicago that is considered to be a food desert. Building the project will create about 250 short-term jobs and then 25 permanent jobs related to running the facility. Renewable natural gas, or biomethane, can be used for all the same things as fossil natural gas. These are some of the utilities that are developing RNG resources for their customers. By including biomethane in their pipelines, they can dilute the overall emissions profile of the gas they deliver. SoCalGas, for instance, is taking advantage of California's huge investment in dairy biomethane, which is significantly carbon innovative. These are some examples of end users. L'Oreal Cosmetics is using biomethane from a nearby landfill at one of its plants in Kentucky. Middlebury College will be buying it from a nearby dairy farm for heating. The Port of Seattle is buying biomethane to heat the terminal at Seattle's Tacoma Airport and to run airport buses. And the University of California is buying it to offset some of their natural gas use. Now, the most common use for biomethane in the US right now is transportation. If you're not familiar with natural gas vehicles, we've got a bunch of them in New York City. The MTA has been running buses fueled by compressed natural gas for years now, and they will now be fueling them with biomethane. UPS has been using renewable natural gas to fuel its CNG trucks, including tractor trailers, for several years also. Waste Management uses biomethane from its own landfills to fuel some of its trucks. And as you can see, about half of the LA bus fleet uses biomethane. Turning back to the question of carbon neutrality and carbon negativity, here are some examples from transportation data from California showing the total life cycle emissions for various fuels. The renewable natural gas is shown on the right, made from food waste, dairy manure, and swine manure, all come in carbon negative, meaning that they prevent more greenhouse gas emissions that come from using them. And that's because of captured methane. So if we're converting food waste to biogas into biomethane, this graphic changes slightly. We're not the only ones who think biomethane is a good thing, as shown in these comments from the UN, the European Commission, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Arguably not enough. This slide shows comparative development of biomethane and biogas resources in Europe and the US. In total area, Europe is about 20% larger than the US. It has a little over double the population. They have got 8 times the number of biogas projects and 3.5 times the number of biomethane projects. As in many things renewable energy, Europe is ahead of us. The Obama administration took the potential for biogas seriously and produced the Biogas Opportunities Roadmap report in 2014. Unfortunately, we haven't moved very far from that 2100 project since then. And bringing things back to the local or regional level, New York State has got significant potential resources for biogas and biomethane production, as shown on the left. But what do those numbers actually mean? If you took it all and used it for transportation, now 18% of New York's diesel transportation fuel certainly doesn't solve our whole emissions problem, but it is a piece in the larger puzzle of cleaning up our energy to address climate change. And transportation is the largest single source of emissions in New York and in the United States. We need to have an all of the above approach to reducing emissions. As a member of the Senate Special Committee on the Climate Crisis said in 2019, there is no silver bullet for climate change, but there is silver buckshot. And that's the approach that we need to take using all the options that we have. And finally, biogas and biomethane also create green jobs in both urban and rural communities. These are just examples of some of the trades and skills directly and indirectly related to these projects. Now, I mentioned earlier that in terms of biomethane development, we're lagging Europe and that there were only about 160 operational projects in the US last year. But 4 years ago, that was only about 50 projects. So the industry is definitely growing and doing so rapidly. We are also seeing more diversity in the types of projects being built and in where they are being built. And thank you very much. I'll see if there are any questions.
Yes, there were several questions. I sought to address a few while you were speaking because I didn't know if we would run out of time. But Andrew Matthews is asking, in terms of the input into these systems, is there any requirement for the food waste? Can it be anything such as food and vegetables, starches, grains, meats, fish bones, etc.? does it take everything? Phil, you want to take that?
A digester needs to be balanced. You'll on the job slide, you'll have seen chemists included, and the balance of what is going into a digester needs to be carefully maintained so that things don't become too alkaline, they don't become too acidic, or else the microbes that are in the digester will be killed and will stop doing their job. So in theory, yes, you can put pretty much any food waste into a digester, but you have to be sure to balance it with other things to prevent the chemistry going too far in one direction or another.
And if you were to sell this fertilizer, what sort of end markets come to your mind initially? I want to just quickly tackle this, and maybe you could chime in, Phil. I think the idea specifically regarding this community scale urban project that Phil mentioned would be to use the digestate on site. So you'd use that to create the fresh food and fruits and vegetables for the residents at no cost to them. And anything that's left over, you can use that in, you know, community gardens. A lot of the NYCHA campuses around New York City have community gardens that can utilize the digestate. And again, it would really depend on the amount of digestate that is produced, which depends on the volume of food waste that any given campus is able to produce. So I'm not sure, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, but I'm not sure that a project like this would produce fertilizer in such excess to be able to sell to urban farms outside the city, as your question is suggesting. Phil?
If you are talking about rural projects, farm projects, the digestate that is produced from, say, a dairy digester can, for instance, be sold to farms that don't have livestock. It is a good input for organic farms that don't want to be using chemical fertilizer. But as far as the overall business model for anaerobic digestion goes, marketing the fertilizer and getting it, dividing it up into components and getting it its certifications has proven to be a little bit of a challenge. And that is something that a lot of work is being done on. But organic farms would definitely be an outlet, urban farms, home gardens, particularly for the compost part.
Yeah, and just to repeat a question that was asked and that I answered in the chat, Callie Wentling, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Callie, asked, what does the maintenance of such a system look like? The maintenance of an anaerobic digestion system. Specifically, in terms of the community scale project, again, I want to focus on that. Phil, you can touch on the other areas. I said that, you know, the project would be self-sustaining through community involvement and resident staffing, volunteers to create new opportunities for skills training and technology demonstration built around urban food production, recycling, and nutrition. You know, we have a relationship with Impact Bioenergy, company that Andrew Matthews also mentioned in the chat. And they have training methods that, you know, we were talking about finding ways to have sort of an accreditation system where they can train residents and they'd be certified to be able to maintain and operate the technology. And in so doing, we won't need to bring outsiders into the communities to, you know, help operate this thing. It's actually, it belongs to them. We want to promote the idea of community ownership. Phil.
Kyle, I have just gotten a message from Christy. They are musicking us off if this were the Oscars. So our contact information is shown, was shown on our last slide, and of course will be shared by WISE, and we're happy to answer any other questions that we can. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was
so interesting, Phil and Kyle. We can really have you for a whole conference. And Larissa and Sam, that was really super interesting too. And you can see how these two things can kind of go together. So I'm back. I wanted to let you know more about how you can get involved with EGE. So I'm going to actually start with a Bob Dylan quote, just to shake it up a little bit. And what he said was, you should always take the best from the past, leave the worst back there, and go forward into the future. And that's where we are right now. We're at a moment where we have to go forward into the future. And despite all the things that have really gone wrong with climate change, what we've been hearing when we work in the schools is that after working with EGE, everyone feels a lot more hopeful, because we're looking for to find the right course of action. And when we find the right course of action and we are able to discuss these challenges, we're really being able to go forward and address them instead of being fearful of them. So the WISE Institute is a college and career readiness program, and this is the mechanism by which we meet the next generation of talent and provide them with the capacity to influence change. And how we do this is the WISE Institute offers enriched learning opportunities through seminars and role models. And we connect classroom learning to with employer expectations. And in doing so, we support the mission of schools to improve educational outcomes. And that includes high school graduation, college enrollment, and retention rates. So the EDGE initiative is a part of the WISE Institute, and we leverage that system of role models and seminars to teach content. And with the EDGE initiative, we're focusing in on the complex environmental, social, and economic challenges through sustainability education. And we incorporate some of the things that we've been hearing with Phil, the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as STEM content, so that we can incorporate these skills across the disciplines. And in doing so, we are helping students to make that connection that sustainability can really be a part of every career. So, and we've been really successful over the past 3 years since EDGE launched. These are the types of things that students have been saying. And this is just from this past semester, the fall semester of 2020. But interestingly, these are things that the students often say again and again. So, for example, every week I was introduced to new careers as well as new concepts and ideas about how to make our living more sustainable. And as students are becoming much more active about climate change and about sustainability, it's nice to know that they think that what they like about it is everything had a purpose and a connection to the world right now. So we're achieving the task of helping students integrate sustainability in all their career interests. So how do we do it? We can do it in a number of ways. One is through this flexible model to support instruction in a course. So we can come in once a week with our volunteers and with our curriculum to teach a class within your economics class, within your government class, or your earth science class. Or we can also do it as a standalone 8 to 9 week seminar. And each session is a class period, so it fits really well. We can also present virtually. That's how we're doing it now during COVID. However, as we move out of COVID, we're hoping that we will come back into the classroom in New York City and continue with the live instruction outside of the live virtual instruction outside of New York City. That is until we establish more partnerships nationally. So we are able to work with our presenters to do 40 to 60 minute live instruction so that it's flexible for your school model. So the EDGE initiative features 2 seminars currently. And these seminars are 8 to 9 weeks long. One is the Introduction to Sustainability, and the other is case studies of sustainable firms. We have curriculum that goes with it. We have projects and tools that go with it. It's all prepared. And the way it's taught is through our robust network of advisors and professionals who come in and blend in their knowledge and what's happening in their field currently. And with our partnerships, we also have opportunities for activities and job shadows and things like that. And of course, as we are doing here, we're providing professional development. So what's involved in the Introduction to Sustainability seminar? So we're looking at human impact, climate change, and the carbon footprint using 5 areas. And that is energy, mobility and transportation, materials, manufacturing, using and reusing, food, buildings, and efficiency design. We use a framework so that students can analyze these 5 industry areas and fully understand it. With case studies of sustainable firms, we first help the students understand what is a sustainable business model. And then we go one step further or a couple steps further and help them really begin to analyze it. So we focus on 3 areas: consumer packaged goods. In the case study that students will do will be on Unilever. We have all the case study questions and we help guide that process. And the second topic is sustainable oriented innovations. So we're looking at how innovations can be beneficial or it can be detrimental, and how we can look at these innovations to ensure that they are actually sustainable. And the case study for that is cloud computing. And then we look at energy companies and the net zero promise. And of course, we want all of our energy to come from, to be clean. But how can we make that happen? And it's a very complex process, of course. And so we can look at the case study with AP, or we can use the energetic game. So that really sort of depends on the capacity of the programming at the school. So what's our secret sauce? Our secret sauce is really our advisory committee, our EDGE advisory committee. And you can see here their credentials and their background. We have engineers, we have professors, we have physicists, and at the same time we have finance people and we have architects on our team. And they help us curate and identify the areas that are fundamental for high school students to understand, so that when they go into college or into the into the workplace, they can really use some of the framework and platforms that we've set up for them to analyze what's going on around them. And not only do they help us to identify some key areas, they also come in to teach. So they use the curriculum and give us feedback, and they, year on top of year, they've really been key to developing high quality curriculum. So in addition to learning about sustainability, we have the added benefit of students being more interested in STEM careers. And as you can see here, there's significant increase. And the students are, and this happens actually just after one seminar. That's 8 to 9 weeks, and we can see the difference here. So the future is now, and WISE is looking to advance sustainability education in every high school. We want to build a network of private and public partnership to work with schools using the EDGE curriculum. It's very easy to get started. We will be sending out a survey after the conference and to ask if you're interested in any way. So with schools, we can support you in implementing an EDGE program that's right for your school. And with volunteers and companies, we'll provide you with a variety of flexible dates and times and technical assistance, because we have a lot of schools and they have a lot of different structures, and we can find the right volunteering programming for you. So I wanted to briefly explain EDGE to you and how we can all work together through EDGE. And so we thank you for listening and coming to the conference today. And on behalf of WISE, we'd like to thank our volunteers and our partners for all that you do. WISE is very fortunate to have amazing champions of in education. And the leader among our champions is Jim Avery, our very own WISE board chair.
Thanks very much, Christy. I appreciate that. I'm Jim Avery, chair of the board of WISE. WISE is always striving to provide cutting-edge programs that are truly relevant and to prepare our students for an ever-changing and fragile world that awaits them. This program to advance sustainability education is a perfect example of that. And it resonates with students across a wide range of interests. And we try to make a complex subject accessible. And the key is to find the right entry point. Even today's discussion about the world of food cuts across science, technology, business, health, wellness, product design, marketing, social equity issues, and government policy. So we're grateful for your participation today, and we encourage you to spread the word about this important, accessible, and impactful program. I'm looking forward to hearing from our next panel of experts, and it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of that panel, Mr. Harun Asad. Harun has been a real champion of sustainability, ESG, and corporate responsibility. His deep background in innovation and marketing at many leading companies, including Con Edison, Kantar Millward Brown, and AOL. He's led numerous industry councils and advisory committees. He's been a faculty member at many universities, including New York University. And most of all, as Christy said, we're grateful for his leadership as the chair of our EGE Advisory Committee, where he's been instrumental in shaping this program. Today, he'll be the moderator of our next panel, Innovations in Food Sustainability. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Harun Asad.
Thank you, Jim, for the kind introduction. Appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure to be part of the WISE Institute journey and in developing this program. So it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to moderate this session. I'm very pleased to welcome our esteemed panelists. We have Ynestrillas, and I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly. Forgive me if I get it slightly off. Ynestrillas from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions, or UN Sustainable Solutions. Jillian Hishaw, author and CEO of F.A.R.M.S, who comes from a legal and regulatory background. And we have Ricky Silver, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Daily Harvest, one of the modern day meal kit programs out there. And last but not least, we have Lucia Aguilar, Director of Advocacy and Food Pantry at LSA Family Health Services. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to each of you to do a brief introduction of yourselves for just a couple of minutes so that the audience can get a little bit more acquainted with you. And in order to do that, I'm going to start with Anna, and then when you're finished your introduction, Anna, you would pass the baton over to the next person and so on. So without further ado, Anna, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invite. As you mentioned, I work with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I particularly work at the Youth Initiative, where we have multiple programs that focus on empowering the youth to take action towards sustainable development. And we do that through a wide array of programs. The one that I lead is called the Local Pathways Fellowship Program, where throughout a year we teach young people the issues that our cities are facing, and we guide them through the development of a project. So they develop a project on their own that solves the issue within their city. Our program has a global reach, and we have every year 100 different fellows from different cities around the world that are working to solve an urban problem. I just want to briefly say, saying at the beginning, we are facing a rapid urbanization, and today 50% of the world's population already lives in cities, and this will only increase. By 2050, we're expecting to see 70% of the world's population. This comes to emphasize why it is important to focus in cities in order to achieve sustainable development. And now, moving on to the youth, today half of the world's population is under the age of 30. So we definitely need to tap into the people that don't live in cities yet. We see 40% more likeliness of young people wanting to move to cities than the rest of the people that don't live in cities already. So young cities moving forward. And what young people bring to cities are energy, ambition, capacity for activism, and something that I consider very important is their creativity. We need to tap into their creativity and empower them so that we can find the best solutions possible for our future. I just want to be very brief, as I know we're running a little late, so I would like to turn it over to Jillian.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and thank you panelists and Christy. My name is Jillian Hishaw. I am an attorney and author and also founder of Family Agriculture Resource Management Services. And we have 3 different program areas. We provide free legal services to particularly aging farmers of color. And we also have a food bank program where we purchase produce that the farmers usually compost, and then it's all donated 95% in rural high poverty communities. And this program is nationwide. And then we also have an emergency fund for the farmers, and that covers cancer treatments. We've paid for funeral expenses for farmers that have passed away of COVID, tractor repair. Of course, we have an enormous amount of crop loss the past 5 years in particular due to climate change. And now I will pass it over to Ricky. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and happy to be here with you all. So my name is Ricky Silver, and I'm the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Daily Harvest. We are a direct-to-consumer brand delivering delicious and nourishing food in a lot of different formats now. We actually started off just in the smoothie category, but now sell a multitude of categories in this platform. And we focus primarily on driving value and quality back all the way to the farm, which we'll get into a little bit more during the panel discussion. So yeah, my role at the company is the end-to-end supply chain. So I like to say from concept to doorstep. So thinking about what we make, how we make it, for who we're making it, and then all the way throughout the system of sourcing, food safety and quality, manufacturing and fulfillment. So prior to being with Daily Harvest, I was the Director of Innovation at Vita Coco, which is the global ready-to-drink coconut water leader. Was an amazing experience, really focusing on one agricultural commodity, Daily Harvest taking that experience and now thinking about it across a wide variety of commodities. So very, very interesting there. And actually, all this was sort of the trajectory, because I have a huge passion for food and the sort of intersection between food and science. I received or worked on getting my master's in chemistry at NYU, followed up by my MBA, and all the while I've done some personal chef work as well. So have a huge passion for the intersection of food, science, and sustainability, and just very happy to be here with you all. And with that, I will pass it off to Lucia Aguilar to introduce herself.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Lucia Aguilar, and I am part of LSA Family Health Service, LSA for short. We are located in East Harlem, and we're a multi-service agency that focuses on empowering our clients and meeting them where they are. We connect them with resources. We have a food pantry that we know if clients are coming in to our agency in need of food, they have other problems going on in their lives. And we try to address these issues, connecting them with public benefits or lawyers as they may need. And like our food pantry we saw a huge increase after COVID hit.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for the introductions. Appreciate that. Let me kick it off with some questions. We'll start with Lucia. And I'm glad that you touched on the pandemic in the last part of your introduction. That's going to be my first question. If you could elaborate in a little bit more detail, how did the pandemic and also thinking going forward about climate change, which is probably going to have some potential disruptions as well. How do both of those impact food supply chain issues, food insecurity, particularly in the communities that you serve, such as East Harlem and so on?
Thank you, Harun. Yes, I'm going to give you some context before COVID. East Harlem has a very high rate of obesity, asthma, diabetes, hypertension, and all COVID just made things worse. A lot of people think that only the homeless people come to food pantries, but that is not the case. A large portion of our population are working families. But these working families spend more than 30% of their income on their rent. This forces them to live with other family members to divide the rent. And once COVID hit, we saw the huge need in the community. The clients had these obstacles before COVID, so COVID just made everything worse. When the restaurants started closing down, a lot of the clients lost their income, they lost jobs, they were not able to pay their rent. We saw a huge increase in the clients coming into our food pantry. Before COVID, we were serving around 150 families a week. They were allowed to come once a month. At the height of the pandemic, we were feeding 800 families a week. Given these numbers, we decided that we need to do more for our community. We allowed them to come in twice a month to our food pantry, and we made sure that we provide fresh fruits and vegetables in our pantry bags, because as you know, East Harlem, we have a high rate of bodegas on every corner. We have less supermarkets. The fresh vegetables are less available. And so we want to make sure our clients are getting the right nutrition that they deserve by providing them with fresh fruits and vegetables in every pantry bag.
Thank you for the feedback. I'm going to diverge a little bit from the script of questions, because this is such an important topic and impacts so many different people, so many different sectors of the economy. I'm going to run it around to all of you if you could comment on the same question. In particular, I'm thinking about, in Ricky's case, you've had a lot of experience and innovation in your background. So I'm curious how you guys are thinking about evolving going forward based on what you've seen. And then Jillian, in your experience working with small farms and regulatory issues, what are you seeing on that front? So first to Ricky and then over to Jillian, and I'll circle back to Anna. I'd like to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, and on a personal level, the impact of COVID, the disparate impact that it's had on different communities, but really particularly on the dichotomy of food availability and food waste, and then the acceleration of hunger at the same time, shows just how broken the systems are, right? In some cases, we were speaking with farms that overnight lost their guarantee of crop purchases from the food service and restaurant industry, and we're struggling to understand, could they even afford to make the investments in planting in a biodiverse way? And I'm sure we can talk about this in the panel, but we know from a sustainability perspective, if farmers are forced to go back to sort of the core commodity crops of the U.S., that is long-term impacts from a sustainability perspective. So what we've been trying to do is, yes, our brand offers and sells a number of, a large variety of food to our customers, but we also have capabilities we've been building up and relationships we've been building up and partnerships we've created. How can we leverage those to create new supply chains for those that need it, or create new supply chains that put more money back into the hands of farmers directly, so that there's more resiliency in the system and there's more collaboration in the system. Much of what I think our last 100-year plus of history in this country has been sort of focused on efficiency and sort of innovation in silos. And I hope what we spur coming out of the pandemic is a new way to think about innovative approaches, which is cross-functional and collaborative.
Are you seeing, Ricky, a trend, and let's, use the term technically speaking trend, so not, stops and starts, but actual momentum and continuing traction? Are you seeing a trend with indoor agriculture or vertical farming as a way to prop up, particularly in hard to reach areas around the world?
It's a good question. It's not something that we as a business necessarily are heavily focused on currently. That doesn't mean that it's not happening elsewhere. And I think, just from a supplier perspective, you think about, again, I use the word resiliency again, the ability to navigate changes in climate or changes in environment. Certainly those types of solutions should afford and should create new opportunity.
Yeah. Jillian, over to you, from a small farms perspective and from a regulatory perspective.
Well, it's definitely hit hard. Before COVID, we were basically procuring about 50 to 100,000 pounds a year. And we've had our program for about 7 years, but last year we definitely increased it. We procured about 750,000 pounds nationwide to be donated. And a lot of the farmers are going out of business, unfortunately. I mean, even between 2012 and 2017, over 140,000 farms went out of business or consolidated. And just to break that down, we lose about 37 mid to small farms a day in this country. And it's basically our food system is crashing. You saw that with the long lines of the food banks down in Texas and across the country. And it's crashing because we're dependent more on 4,000 acre farms to grow our food in mass production, while we're selling out the small farmer and pushing him or her or them on the brink of bankruptcy. I've had more calls regarding Chapter 12 bankruptcy, which, there's 5 different chapters of bankruptcy, but Chapter 12 is designated for farmers and fishermen. And so when it comes to the current state of the food system, COVID definitely decimated. Before that, it was hanging on by a shoestring. I mean, and even with the PPP money, out of the $26 billion that was allocated last fall, about 1% went to small farmers of color. And that was equivalent to $20 million. But then just out of that amount, 60% of that 26 billion went to the top 10% of farmers, and that top 10% are the 3,000 and on up acre farms. And so when you have that type of model and you have the average small farmer making less than $10,000 annually in yearly revenue, that's a problem. And so rural poverty and hunger is at an all-time high. And we also are seeing that, for example, in May of last year, we donated dry rice and beans to a Seventh-day Adventist church in Brooklyn. And, they wanted us to do more. And so,
of course, right. Are you hearing from your networks that Biden's plan, his quote unquote 3 trillion plan, or whatever it winds up being, but a big part of it's around infrastructure? Are you hearing from your networks that it may be addressing some of this farming issue, or it's just going to be a state by state issue?
Yeah, they're definitely addressing some of the issues. Half of the 10 billion that went to USDA, 5 billion is going to socially disadvantaged or farmers of color, because our numbers in the Black, Hispanic, and Asian and Indigenous population regarding farming is at an all-time high. And just in the Black community, we lose 30,000 acres per year in land ownership. And so we really need to also support farmers of color because they grow culturally appropriated food. And I found this on my own. I buy food that communities of color want to eat. They don't like beets. They don't like peas. They like, just different things. And so purchasing that type of food, depending on the community, is also important.
Yeah, Anna, let me turn it over to you and get your thoughts from the UN SDG perspective.
Yeah, well, I think we can comment on everyone's issues. So just lastly from Jillian, as she was mentioning, all these issues were already here, and COVID just came to tilt the glass. So we definitely saw the fragility that the supply chain had. And for example, from the cohort of fellows that we had last year, we saw people from Thailand, India, Australia, South Africa, and Kenya push for community gardens out of this program. So they realized the need that there was to address the links that we have between the urban and the peri-urban agriculture to increase resiliency, as Ricky was mentioning. This type of community gardens can increase resiliency for not being enough to feed a whole city. We would have to look at vertical farming if we want to do that. And I'm currently based in Mexico City, and for example, here we are already seeing a change in real estate, where they know where the future of urban is going, and that we will very soon in the future be driving less and having less cars in cities, therefore needing less parking. Building with an indoor parking garage, they're already building it with the requirements that would be needed to turn it into an indoor vertical farm later in the future. And just kind of like a fun fact to what Lucia was mentioning in terms of obesity and the big issue that is. COVID also came to stress that at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a big part of cities is mobility and social economy, sustainable economies. So a lot of people, when they lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, they turned to food delivery apps as a source of income. And also food delivery apps saw a change on the type of food that was being ordered through their platforms, from the working person who would order like a healthier lunch as a salad or a sandwich. They saw a shift to chicken wings, pizza, and so on. So there was a shift in the type of food that was being delivered, and much more food being delivered. And this impacts like the whole mobility infrastructure in the city.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm hearing from all of you that there's potentially a very interesting possibility to do strategic partnership in the name of one of the goals of the UN SDGs, working with Ricky and Daily Harvest to figure out how we take an organization like Daily Harvest and their products and services and bring it to socioeconomically disadvantaged populations. Would anyone like to comment on that? And I'm not putting Ricky on the spot here. It's just an interesting theme that has emerged. So anyone like to comment on that? Strategic partnerships related to, disadvantaged populations, food insecurity, and so on?
I can start with just a couple of thought starters, maybe. As I mentioned, I think brands like ours have an opportunity both to make our finished product available, but also our capabilities. And so, a little bit about us, we've invested and built out a network of frozen, individually quick frozen IQF processors that allow us to work with a variety of raw materials and ensure that they're grown in the right ways, picked at the right time, and then frozen in a way that locks in their nutritional value and their overall quality that leads to a better product at the end of the day. But it also creates a shelf life and a usage application that would exceed the traditional fresh supply chain. And so, just one thought starter that I wanted to throw out there is when we think about the ability to connect farms to those that need the food the most, we're leaning into and thinking about how can we leverage our capabilities to take food that may otherwise be going to waste, move it through our frozen supply chain, and then make it available for those that need it. And to Jillian's point, also not being prescriptive about what people will like or want to eat, right? We shouldn't necessarily assume that the broccoli and cheese, vegan cheese that we have is the right SKU for everyone, right? And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that brands like ours, I hope, will play a role in not just thinking of it from a branded perspective, but from a capabilities perspective.
And then we also just need to take into consideration rural communities. I mean, a lot of my communities that I work in, they don't have running water, electricity, some don't have the internet. At least 40 to 35% of communities in this country lack broadband internet, and 30% of rural hunger is higher in rural communities than urban. And so also, I would love to partner with Daily Harvest, to get some of that food out to the rural communities. And even,
Oops. For the organizers, we've lost some microphone from Ricky and Jillian, just as a heads up. Okay, Jillian is back. Okay, they're back. Thank you for the quick solve.
I've been doing also work in the Caribbean, as well as Sierra Leone and India. And even there, I'm finding, it's the same challenges. And the food bank program operates in those 3 countries as well. And so definitely connecting the dots, even internationally in rural communities, is quite needed, because a lot of these farmers, they love to farm, but they don't really know how to sell. So they'll plant just to plant because they love it, but they just compost it over, each season. So
yeah. Lucia, Anna, any additional comments on this theme? Partnerships for food insecurity and disadvantaged populations?
Yes, these connections will be great for food pantries like mine, connecting items that are perfectly good condition that, some of the stores or farmers are going to throw away, we can take and give back to the community. Like I said, we're seeing the increase in clients needing food. Why not make that bridge and connect these people with the food instead of throwing it away, making it go to waste?
Yeah, and we heard a lot about that too in Phil's presentation from the last session about how food waste is being converted into biogas and so on. Anna?
Well, I would advocate for partnering with the youth. We see all these grant complications require direct and immediate intervention, and we need to get all stakeholders at the table, including the youth, mobilizing their voices and learning from their fresh and innovative solutions is something that we can all benefit from. So I would just kind of like push for everyone's initiatives to always have a youth representative in their teams. From what Christy was mentioning earlier from her presentation, to take the best from the past and move towards the future. Historically, we've seen that some of the greatest discoveries or scientific discoveries have been made by young people, like Einstein developed the theory of relativity when he was 26. Sometimes the youth is not invited to give their opinion. So I think we can only learn from them and tap into their creativity and empower them.
Can you elaborate a little bit further on that? I'm sorry, if you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit further on how you specific programs that you offer to another organization to bring youth to have a seat at the table. For instance, do you create cohorts of youth groups that are available to be observers or work with organizations directly or anything along those lines?
So what we do is we give them visibility opportunities. So we try to either train them on how they can develop solutions so that they can go out into the world and pitch in solving these issues, or we give visibility to the solutions they have already developed. So for example, we have a program called Youth Solutions, where we receive applications from all over the world, like over 3,000 applications of young people that have solutions that are ready to be scaled. And we train them to get funding for their solutions or give them visibility. We have a published report that highlights their stories. In my program, I train them on how to develop a solution. So they come in without a solution, and throughout the year, they go understanding how to analyze the stakeholders in the industry, how to understand the history about the issue, how to connect with the stakeholders to form partnerships so that they can push forward their solutions. And we've seen like great success stories. As I was mentioning, we had just from this previous cohort, 5 community gardens pop up in 5 different cities.
That's very exciting.
They are.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Thank you for sharing. Let me switch gears a little bit to a new topic, and that is the one on the terminology called regenerative systems. And I know that, Ricky, in your case, that's one of the key things that Daily Harvest likes to talk about in terms of value proposition to the market is regenerative food production and distribution. For the benefit of the audience, some of whom may not be too familiar with this term, can you elaborate a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about what it means to us, because I know the term regenerative agriculture in particular is one that is starting to be refined and more formalized. But for us, we really think about is how can we invest in solutions, technology, commitments, partnerships that are doing more than just reducing harm, but actually creating value or adding back into the food system as a whole. So from a regenerative agriculture perspective, there's a lot to be said about the way we grow food, I should say, or raise animals, right, in a way that would introduce value back into the soil. At the end of the day, without the soil, we aren't able to have a viable food system. And hundreds of years of, again, as I said, focusing on efficiency, focusing on getting more out of the same land has led to a destruction of that soil and has, quite frankly, led to a lot of release of CO2 as a whole. And so the regenerative ag space is looking to support and build up practices that isn't just about growing, for example, organic produce, but actually growing and raising food that would create a long-term sustainable solution for the planet. We go into other areas of our business and look at trying to take a similar mindset, or in terms of adding back as opposed to just reducing harm. So whether that be in the decisions we make on our packaging or in the crops we actually seek to use in our food. For example, we're right now really focused on climate-friendly varietals of crops, actually working with the farmers in our supply chain or new ones to focus in on building not just a biodiverse set of agricultural commodities, but commodities that are actually known to improve soil reduce CO2 emissions, et cetera. So we're trying to embrace the regenerative approach throughout our business, as opposed to just what is known as regenerative agriculture. But it's a difficult and ambitious effort. And I like to stress when I'm ever on these discussions is like the power of partnership. I started my career at PepsiCo, and I will tell a story that I often tell, no shade to any of those that still work there. It was an amazing company, but I was pretty much laughed out of a room early on in my career when I suggested that maybe we work with Coca-Cola on some of the more sustainable packaging solutions for the beverage world. You might imagine that didn't go over so well. But I think we're seeing a shift, I think, in industry, where people are recognizing the importance of that partnership model. And so, Daily Harvest isn't going to be able to solve this on our own. We need to be thinking about who else can we work with in the branded side, but also in the nonprofit side. Advocacy is a big part of this. It was sort of alluded to already, but the incentive structures that are set up by the federal government in terms of what is grown and what is the pricing on those commodities is a big part of this. So this is a all hands on deck type of a forward-looking strategy.
Absolutely. Appreciate the insights and feedback. Anyone else would like to comment on this theme of regenerative? Are you hearing about it in your work, whether it's in small farms or in small communities? Is it a point of emphasis? I don't know.
Yes, it is. It definitely is. But the reality is that most of the farmers in this country are conventional. And that's because regenerative or organic is quite expensive. I mean, you look at the Good Agricultural Practice Food Safety Permit, that's $1,500, per crop. And it's an annual expense, and it's a lot of money. And so a lot of the small farmers, once again, are being priced out because they have to come up with $1,500 just to grow lettuce and $1,500 to grow berries. And it adds up after a while. And so I think that having some type of cost share or incentives, particularly for small local producers, it's very important. And I would definitely urge companies like Daily Harvest to also consider that, as part of their strategy.
If you don't mind, I'd love to jump off that a little bit too. We've noticed a big gap in the organic farming space because of the tension in the price differential, in the actual demand and supply dynamics, and also in the commitment it takes for a conventional farmer to go from conventional to organic. They don't receive that certification for 3 years. So we've started to, we're by no means all the way where we want to be, but we've started to really lean into transitional organic commitments where we actually are working with the farmers that want to make those transitions, but won't be given the premium, the organic premium during that transition period. We're actually committed to paying that premium during the transition so that they can confidently make the change. Now, again, we're just one brand and it's just one decision, but I also prompt that from a regulatory and sort of a certification process. The more brands right now aren't incentivized to do this if they want to keep their organic certification.
Right.
That's a big problem when retailers require it, customers require it. What do you do in that case? So I just wanted to bring that up as these are complicated issues.
There's a need for policy to participate for sure. Let me give everybody a heads up. We're going to close up the session in about 8 minutes. I would like to invite the audience to submit any questions in the Q&A box again. And while that's happening, I'd like to shift into career discussion a little bit, especially for the benefit of the folks in the audience as well, because one of the key things that we do with the EGE program and at WISE Institute more broadly is to help with college and career readiness. So let's go around the horn, starting with Lucia first. Any suggestions for those who may be interested in getting into a career focused on sustainable food?
Volunteer. Come down
The door is open.
yes, come to a food pantry, see the works, what's needed. It's a lot of work interacting with the clients, seeing what their needs are. But you get such great benefit out of it. You talk to the individuals, you see what's going on in their lives and how they are struggling every day just to get food on their tables and feed their families. So I think just volunteering at any nonprofit that has a food pantry, community gardens, it's a great way to start and try to gain experience.
Anna.
Yeah, well, at SDST Youth, we have a wide array of programs that they can be a part of if they want to get involved into the sustainable development industry. It can range from education to my program, which focuses on cities. As I mentioned, we take 100 fellows every year and we guide them through the development of a project. Many times this project results into them starting their own company or their own NGO. So they can create the career their own, or this can certainly prepare them for entering a career in sustainable development, being part of any of our programs.
Thank you. Jillian.
Sure. I have been working with interns for 14 years. And so for the past 8 that I've had F.A.R.M.s, we have an internship program. And so we have 3 interns at the moment, and we're finally able to pay them. So let me know if you're interested in ag law or, food systems and things like that. And yeah, so we teach them about policy. We also teach them how to do legal research and writing and work on policy initiatives, along with how to write a grant and, what does bookkeeping really look like? Because, a lot just going into creating F.A.R.M.s, I'm like, wow, I really need a bookkeeper. Just, different things like that. Just the day-to-day is also important to teach them about, the numbers and business aspects of it. So.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure everybody will be pleased to hear about those potential internship opportunities. Ricky, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to second the suggestion to volunteer, to get out there and to understand how the sort of systems are connected. And, I'll just say it's also, these are good reminders for me as someone who 10, 15 years ago really didn't understand what jobs were available, right? I think oftentimes coming out of undergraduate or even graduate programs, the track seems very narrow, but actually making connections and building connections to understand what types of jobs even exist. So I just want to throw out there, happy to make my contact information available. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about food, industry, sustainability at all. These types of connections have made a huge difference in my career. Because quite frankly, I didn't even know the word supply chain not that long ago. So yeah, just happy to be a resource if it's helpful.
Yeah, it used to be called procurement, right? Geez, thank you all so much for participating today, taking time out of your busy schedules, and for sharing your wonderful insights. I'm going to we have one question floating into the box. It looks like, oh my goodness, this is so long. Thank you for the detailed question. Let's see if I can digest and interpret this quickly. The emphasis here in this question is that cities have the capacity to grow smaller. So if anyone would like to, maybe that's through the indoor ag we briefly touched on, maybe there's through other innovations. Any thoughts or suggestions in response to that comment or question?
Yes, I have a comment. So I was an environmental planner for the city of Kansas City at home. And we looked at various Northwestern cities, particularly Portland. They build up, not out. And they're very strategic in preserving their land and, conservation, also even down to the height of their buildings. And so, there's definitely workable models that cities can adopt, but it's if they want to do it, but everything definitely starts at planning and zoning.
Yeah, I mean, is that something that you're saying is going to be a part of the future of urban city planning, smart cities, that whole concept? Is that in the mix of or is that mostly focused on energy and transportation?
I see it mostly focused on energy and transportation, but cities are starting to revert, like Atlanta. They've started to include more urban gardening and edible gardens and things like this, rooftop, in their planning model. So I am seeing a shift compared to 10 years ago when I was a planner.
Yeah, yeah. Ricky, did you have a thought that was running through your head?
No, I was trying to think if there was anything specific I could reference, but nothing right now.
All right. Anybody else before we wrap up? All right. Thank you again so much. We'll turn it over to Christy.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Harun, Anna, Jillian, Ricky, and Lucia for your insightful comments and information today. There's so much to all of these topics, and we're very, very grateful that, that you've really provided all of that information for us today. Now, I want to tell you that in my agenda, I didn't actually add aquaculture. So one of the members of the EGE committee has provided an article, and I just put it in the chat for you. So if you wanted to download that article on aquaculture, that would be fish in the fishery industry as a part of food, you're welcome to take that. As mentioned earlier, the CTLE credits was also posted earlier in the chat, and you can download that survey. And I just wanted to also say that Jillian has a great book that'll be out soon. It's a textbook. It's called Land Theft. I know a lot of schools are looking to diversify their textbooks, and I think that's a really great book to look for. And all of this information, contact information and information about the companies and the organizations that presented here are in the agenda and the bios that were provided today. And certainly if there has been any questions that we didn't answer or any additional information that you would like, please do contact me, and I will connect you to the folks who were graciously able to present today. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Eat well.